I'm here at this relaxing beach where nothing bad is happening at all aside from a portal to another dimension opening. Why is this happening? Well, the answer to that is somewhere in my previous video. This is a complete commentary of Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, coming off the back of a commentary on the main campaign or the main game that I did in my previous video. I'm going to vaguely assume that you either know about the original game or saw that video, as we come here to talk about Forged Alliance. What's going on? A massive alien invasion. That's probably going to be a problem. This is caused by the ending of the original game, where the leader of one of the warring factions used some magic to stop the war, but along the way that magical effect also allowed some aliens to show up and invade Earth. These aliens are none other than the originators of the religion that the Aeon, one of the three factions that we played as in the previous game, were worshipping. And it's a religion that is, well, not really a religion, like some sort of ancient knowledge that allows you to do magical quantum things. And that's probably why they were able to come back from another dimension or something. Let's throw the word quantum in a couple more times to explain why aliens are invading. Something quantum rift. Now we have to fight the aliens. And here we have a little bit of an introductory cutscene that actually shows a human city, still with nobody in it, perhaps adding to my theory that the Supreme Commander universe is one where basically nobody is left alive, because industry is so automated. All of human civilization is just like 1,000 people, which is why so many of the maps you see are basically blank when you invade planets, and why when it talks about civilian towns on certain maps, it's always like 2 buildings. I've got this headcanon for what is effectively the reason that they couldn't be bothered to make city maps in Supreme Commander. There's very little evidence that anybody is left alive, and the in-universe technology doesn't require anyone to be alive, so that's good. Well, there's a bit more lore here actually, because at the start of the game you can view this timeline that explains what's going on. So it's a timeline of everything that happened after Supreme Commander and before Forged Alliance, which basically confirms that the Seraphim are here. The angels or something, does that mean? These are the people that the Aeon were worshipping. They've showed up, and it essentially lays out here that part of the Cybran faction, the AI faction, has joined them, and also part of the Aeon, who sort of naturally worship the Seraphim because they are literally the Aeon's gods, will also join them as well, which obviously is just laying the groundwork for having an excuse for you to fight somebody that's not the Seraphim in this campaign, because they can't just have it be you fighting one enemy faction the whole time. So everyone defects, the world is broken up, the galaxy is broken up. We're going to be part of the true blue core Aeon soldiers who will fight for the princess who at some point became a ghost and maybe can still have some influence over the strategy. We'll try to fight the aliens, because as far as we can tell, all the aliens want to do is kill everybody. If you were looking closely at Aeon lore, all the Aeon wanted to do was kill everybody as well in the first game, but they kind of soured on that idea at some point and thought maybe we can leave people alive if they convert to our religion. Now, it's the actual religious apocalypse in Galaxy, and we're going to be cancelling the apocalypse and so on. And we're going to use giant robots to do it as well. It's time for the first level in Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, and we'll look at vaguely what happens throughout the entire campaign, and I'll give a few comments on the strategy and probably some more on the lore as well, and the overall game design. The first design comment to make is that Forged Alliance does presume that you've played the original game. It is a standalone game, but it's basically an expansion of the original game as well. So here in the first level, it's no longer like a tutorial. In the original campaign, it's essentially a very long tutorial where it's gradually introducing new units and new mechanics and new strategic situations. Here it just gives you everything. It gives you the entire roster, throws you in a half-dead base and says, right, save this base, and then go and attack some enemy bases across the water. And in the lore, this mission is like humanity's last chance, I think. We're defending some fort, which is off-map at the moment, which, if captured, will allow the aliens to destroy all of what remains of humanity in the galaxy. So there are some stakes somewhere here. So what are we going to do? It's time to do Supreme Commander stuff that I'm not going to describe in detail, because I'll just assume you know what I'm talking about from the first video or knowing about the game. What I will say is look how casual and slowly I'm playing. Once again, even though this campaign is much harder than the original game's campaign, I'm still just doddering about. You can see me mousing over all of the various buttons. Like, I can never remember where the icon for a certain building is, and I always have to look for it every time. I never remember where it is after finding it, and I'm always like, I wonder what I should build. They have some resources, sit there just sort of looking through the menu, like ignoring the combat happening over my base. This is really my style, and this is great for Supreme Commander, this style being that you suck. This is like a low APM game that would benefit immensely from having high APM, but if you're barely paying attention, so much of the game will play itself as long as you have something of a sound setup, that you don't need to really be trying, and that was what I was talking about in my first Supreme Commander commentary. Like right here, we don't have enough power to run our base, and there are so many things I could do to get that power situation solved. Like really, we want to make it so we're not at a power deficit. This would make it faster for me to build power plants, and then I could get out of the situation real fast. This would take at least like 1 or 2 clicks. I'm just not going to do it. And you really don't need to. This is like really my style of strategy throughout all strategy games, because for whatever reason, when it comes to strategy games, I'm really interested in them from a sort of puzzle or analytical perspective. I have no interest in like pulling strategies off, which just frustrates even me. It's like, I know how to play well, I just find no pleasure in playing well. Like, I don't care about learning the hotkeys. I don't care about learning build orders. I find that so boring. What I find more interesting is calculating what a build order, like what a good build order would be, or just like working out how to play. I never pull off the strategy, so I could be like, build this, build this, build this, build this, but if you told me to actually do it in the game, I don't know where the button to build this is in the game. Like, what do you mean? I'm not a player of a game. I'm a strategy-only strategy gamer. Strategy gaming without the gaming at last. I just look at it and be like, that's cool. And that's why Supreme Commander is very interesting to me. I might have got this across in my first video. It's a game where the actual strategic depth is immense, and you don't need to pull off any of those strategies to win, so it's also good if you can't be bothered to get good at the game. A nice combination for the weird situation I have, where I like to be analytical, but I don't like to gain anything from being analytical. I just like to prove that I could work out how to win. I'll never work out how to press the buttons that make you win after knowing that the buttons exist. There you go, that's my excuse deployed. The world's worst Supreme Commander strategist is here. I know everything about Supreme Commander, except how to play Supreme Commander. And generally speaking, that's not a problem for some reason. So what are we doing right here? After a while, I've rebuilt our base, and you can see my base strategy is going to be something similar throughout the campaign. It's the thing I landed upon in the final mission of the original Supreme Commander, where you just cover all of the available area in shields, cover it all in power generators and mass fabricators, and cover any spaces you have left in long-range artillery. This is the real lazy man strategy, where like we're supposed to go across this waterway and attack 2 enemy bases, but do you really want me to go all the way over there? I'd have to like select units and tell them to go over there. We could just make a gun that can hit the enemy base from here, and the objective is just kill the enemy base. We can do it from here. Not going over there means we won't have a forward foothold for the next objective, we won't capture their economy buildings. However, I also don't necessarily have to do anything, although actually, my plan is undermined by the fact that the enemy are sending lots of amphibious ground attacks across the water, so lots of Aeon units, which is what we're facing right here, can float on water or float over the water, so their land army can attack us despite the water being here. The artillery will fire at will at the closest thing to it, and that a lot of the time is going to be those amphibious units hanging about on the water. That means if I want the artillery to actually focus down the enemy base, I have to click on the artillery and then click on the enemy base. What I'd need to do is basically give a waypoint order onto every building to make sure it gradually killed them all. I think what I actually want in my ideal Supreme Commander setup is literally somebody else is playing the game and I am the Supreme Commander. So I would be standing behind the person playing the game and I would say, order the artillery to destroy the enemy base. That's the only part I'm interested in, the concept of how the strategy should play out. Actually doing it, where you have to waypoint order the guns onto every building, that's not really my style. I like to Somebody else can do that part, okay? Does anybody else feel what I'm getting at here? Does anyone else want to pick up this weird stuff I'm putting down? Supreme Commander needs a mode where you don't even have to play the game. It needs like voice recognition. You shout at the AI and the AI tries to pull off your strategy. I think while that would be impossibly janky, if that could somehow work, I would be really interested in a game like this. As long as the game itself, the strategy elements, are as good as those in Supreme Commander, which really just has it all. That's the whole thing. Massive scale, massive numbers of units, combined arms, and loads of wacky things like nukes and gigantic robots to throw into the mix and break stalemates, stuff like that. It's not especially beautiful, and it doesn't need to be. Half the time you're just looking at icons like right here. Who cares like how beautiful the fighters are? I don't care what my fighters look like. I care how many triangles there are and where the triangles are. So I'm just really happy with the spirit behind this game. And the only general point to make there is somebody should do this again, and I wonder what the explanation is for it not happening again. Like, why is there no spiritual successor to Supreme Commander? Or maybe there is, and I don't know about it. Well, I want you to answer either of those questions in the comments. Tell me how I can get this, but in the future, and preferably one where I don't even have to press anything on the keyboard. I want to sit back on that luxury beach from the beginning saying, yes, yes, fire the artillery, and that will actually work. We're almost there. We're so close to that in Supreme Commander. It's surprising actually how close you can get to that. We're just not quite there. I will never be happy, but I'm so close. And it must be your lucky day. It looks like I decided to leave my base eventually anyway. We haven't got that far in destroying the enemy base, so my artillery attacks probably haven't done very much. Maybe there were shields there for a while. We've got this gigantic fighter screen, which is just going over to get itself killed. That's mainly a distraction to stop the enemy from doing anything about my transports coming in. We didn't really need to play that so carefully, but it was cool to do so anyway, so I've transported over 3 Tier 3 engineers, meaning we can now start building on this side of the pond. The engineers are amphibious, so they can just actually walk across the water or float across. Not sure why I said walk, but it's slower and it's cooler this way. It's also more annoying. So again, I actually clicked the mouse when I didn't need to. So we're starting to make some revolutionary changes in strategy here. What I've got now is a land production base, not a very good one, but enough for now. But I don't want to just make a land army and wipe out the enemy base, because again, we need to chill out. That's the whole Supreme Commander thing. If you just rush the objectives, you'll just lose, because the game, to some extent, assumes that you massively overplayed everything. So you need to sit back and make a much bigger army than you need to do the objective, because something random will probably happen after the objective completes. It actually completed by accident because my artillery was firing away, so my army didn't even move in the end. But now, we're on the next part, and this part, well, we have to actually do something, so there's almost a time limit here. The enemy are attacking that base at the top, and we have to save it. So if I actually did nothing this time, I might lose the stage. I guess it's been set up so that the AI will lose if you don't intervene. So again, I'm being forced to click the mouse here in Supreme Commander. This is absolutely outrageous. But at least we do arrive well in time to save the base. Some of it was destroyed, but we'll come on in. I've got some engineering in there, so we'll make a shield generator and start setting up base defenses for the AI, and our land army will wait and just stop the enemy getting in. In the meantime, our long-range artillery is blowing up the factories the enemy are using to stage their attacks. So the enemy's attacks will get weaker and weaker over time, even if I don't do anything from now on. So we're back on the casual gamer mode right here. But again, it looks like I was willing to play the game, because I decided to send my land army in to attack the enemy bases. Since this is faster than destroying them with artillery and much more effective as well, it just requires you to click twice, I think, to attack move into the enemy base. Obviously, that's a lot of work for me, so I hope you're proud that I've brought you this high-quality gameplay commentary. Now, once you save that base, the map expands again, and things do start to get a bit crazy, and we actually suffer from not having played really slowly, so I was immediately punished for clicking twice. The enemy suddenly have units all over the place. This is what the game likes to do, especially in Forged Alliance. The enemy army size and its locations will just sort of take you by surprise when the map expands when you complete an objective. So we have to fight this new base in the northeast, but they've got stuff all over the map that's now, like, amongst our stuff, killing our dudes. In particular, they have a land army moving towards my toehold base, so my land army needs to move back to attack them from behind. There was also a whole bunch of air attacks coming in, but I think they're already dead. I had this big patrolling screen of fighters, you can see at the bottom there, that was just flying around wasting fuel just in case something was to cross their path, and that actually paid off, although they're now just being hit by the enemy's ground anti-air units. We do take out everything, but for one Colossus that slips through and almost makes it to my secondary base. The Colossus, though, tends to just die if you attack it with a group of gunships, as we see here. It has no anti-air capabilities. It was the same in the original campaign, actually. You had to fight a Colossus, and I just attacked it with gunships, and it's easy. So that's that done. The enemy's big sort of surprise assault is over. Now it's time for us to destroy their base, and what I'm doing there is targeting the artillery to do it for me. I was sort of attacking over land as well, and sort of attacking in the sea, so I'm doing this two-front attack, but I not only don't have the micro to really attack on two fronts, I'm not really trying to have the micro either. I'm just sort of hovering about near the enemy, sniping units that come close to me. What I'm really trying to do is make a forward base. This is just like my favorite strategy, making forward bases. Do we need to do this? No, not really. Like, in this situation, we're floating so many resources. I could just slap down 10 land factories and rally point the stuff they're producing into the enemy base and just whittle them down like that. Because while that seems wasteful, any resources you gain but don't spend are lost. So it is actually fine to just continually feed units into the enemy base like the AI does to you. Well, we're just going to do nothing instead, which kind of feels right. It's like, yes, I'm not wasting anything, but you also are wasting everything by not wasting anything, if that makes any sense whatsoever. It's the Supreme Commander Economy Commentary from the world's leading Supreme Commander economist who can't play Supreme Commander. As we defeat the enemy here, I wanted to throw in one more random topic that I wanted to discuss yesterday but forgot, which is the topic of scripted attacks. In the first game I was complaining that it's kind of easy because the enemy will just always do the same attack against you over and over again, and if you've countered it once, you've countered it every time. And the easy way to get around that is to just do that, but more so. What I'm not asking for is a good AI, I'm asking for better scripting. So all that means in practice is instead of the enemy having like one attack group they'll make to send against you, they have 2 different ones, or 3, and they choose which one to use in a given situation, or it can even be random, that will be fine. You know, it's sort of analogous to designing something like a normal enemy in like an action game. Like, the AI needs to have a quote-unquote move set that it can use against you, and learning the stage is like learning a boss in Dark Souls or something, where you see what moves it has and you work out what to do against it. It's just that it has more than one, because if there is only one, which is what is the case in Supreme Commander normally, it's too easy to deal with. All you have to do is make there be like 3, and suddenly things are interesting, because you don't know what the next one's going to be. You can't be really laid back in your defense. So if we had a version of Supreme Commander where the hard mode wasn't just like the enemy had more units or more resources, it was that the enemy will switch between doing land and air attacks, or it will slightly randomize the position of where it's going to attack, or maybe the scripting could be so complicated or so complex that it would notice where your commander is and try to attack them, or notice where your economy is and try to raid it. Something like that. It can be done, obviously, because we have things like Age of Empires 2 existing in the world, which has a super scripted but advanced seeming AI. And as I was complaining about or ranting about in my previous video, there's also like machine learning style AIs, which were used, if I recall, in things like Unreal Tournament, like old school FPSs, where they were trained off real player data to make them play really well. That's where you get the idea of a bot being separate to the idea of an AI, like a bot is a player trained AI that is unusually good. Anyway, something. Supreme Commander doesn't need to be that much more complex in its design to avoid the pitfalls of how simple it seems. The enemy just have to have 2 more attacks, basically. Add 2 things to the enemy's move set, and that would be fine. It's still easy enough to deal with, still learnable, still pretty casual, but just not quite so extreme in the casualness. So what's happening right here? The thing that happened before, where the map expands and you have to attack to the northeast, happens again, and once again you have to defend a base to the northwest. This time, though, we are fighting those aliens, the Seraphim, who are a different colour on the map. And I say that because That's the biggest difference, really. Like, obviously they have a different unit pool to everything else, everybody else, but they are the same kinds of thing once again. So it fits into the categories of, like, destroyer, cruiser, air superiority fighter, tier 3 land unit, tier 2 anti-air unit, something like that. So handily, the aliens are roughly technologically equivalent to us. So they're actually relatively easy to fight. They're no harder to fight than anybody else. It's just that in the lore, there are lots of them because they're flowing out of this other dimension, and there aren't that many of us left. Although, because they also have this, like, mass and power system where they can just produce more of themselves, I don't know what it means to say there are lots of them, because there are infinite numbers of them and infinite numbers of us, because we're mostly robots. Something, something, something. For some reason, these icons, which are different colours, are fighting each other, and it appears I have some influence over this fight, so let's just do that and not worry about it too much. What you saw me doing just earlier was setting up a new defence base in front of the objective so that the enemy won't take it, but most importantly, that location will be in range of the enemy base. We at last can't just shoot our way out of this with base artillery, because our base is right in the corner. It can't reach the enemy base, even with our super long-range artillery. I think if you play as the UEF, you can build artillery that has infinite range, which would get around this problem. But as poor old Aeon, we can only shoot across 75% of the map. That means our base needs to not be completely in the corner. It needs to not be as far away from the enemy as possible in order to be in range. Well, woe is me. Since we have to make another base anyway to defend the objective, that's fine. What you can see me doing here is microing the naval fight. I focus a lot on the naval fight because I like the naval units. They're very pop-cap efficient and powerful seeming. And the land fight is kind of under control because the AI is playing the land fight as well. So the blue units are fighting the yellow units. I've got this line of green stuff back here to make sure the enemy won't actually get to the objective. And then we can just take our time to make heavy artillery back here. Eventually, we'll start attacking the enemy's production buildings without doing anything, and I'll focus all of my popcap on building the navy. But as you might have noticed, we also lost the navy. The enemy navy was powerful enough that we actually couldn't just break through by attack moving into them, so I had to build some more stuff and prepare and hold back for a bit. Absolutely outrageous. And that's why I say that Forged Alliance is a harder campaign, because in the base game, almost anything I tried, like, always worked completely, like nothing ever failed. Here, in the very first stage of Forged Alliance, we were facing many challenges. They actually sort of made attacks that threatened us, and some of my attacks failed. So we're starting to get into a more balanced sort of look at Supreme Commander, and it gets harder than this, of course. Our defensive line is tested when they come at us with one of their experimental giant robot things. We meet it though with our own experimental giant robot, although ours is a bit smaller, so the Seraphim are one-upping us here, although those gigantic shoulder pads are perhaps making this thing look bigger than it really is. It wastes time shooting my regular units on the ground, while everything else absolutely blasts back at it, and we kill it, which was one of the mission objectives. This kind of experimental also kind of blows up in a weird way. There's no like big climactic explosion. It turns into a ball of lightning, which I think then moves around and does further damage, which I wasn't paying attention to. Well, it's not too bad. What I'm doing is getting my heavy artillery to blow our way through the enemy's production buildings on the way to their base, and it's working pretty well. Even just our AI ally is actually doing pretty good work now, because we've got them so protected. They're not losing units all the time, and they're starting to amass stuff. Your allies do the same constant scripted attack over and over again, same as the enemy. But moving on from what I was saying earlier, there are actually kind of like 3 or 4 moves in the move set, in that the AI is making a ground attack and like 2 different kinds of air attack at the same time over and over. It's still making them too small and too repetitively, but that is better than just doing one of those things, I guess. So something's going on, and this battlefield is pretty chaotic, and this is where the fun of Supreme Commander comes in for me, where you're always switching between different modes of strategy, I guess, like thinking about airplay, then thinking about sea stuff, thinking about your land army, and even thinking about base design, forward bases, use of bases as offensive instruments. Let's call it base play to continue sounding like it's some sort of fetish of some kind, which it is. Things are going pretty well, and here I am doing the gunship spam strategy once again. The downside is that because the enemy have tier 3 units and our gunships are stuck at tier 2, they're not very good at killing the enemy, but I liked doing it anyway. Looks like we got a nuke into the enemy base there. What I did was use my
long-range artillery to take out the enemy's strategic nuke defense first, because then you are free to nuke them at your leisure. And while the AI will try to rebuild it, if you can keep the pressure on, they might not. And it takes a long time to build an anti-nuke missile, so even if they build it, you can still nuke them for a bit before it actually stops you from doing it. Eventually I also got the naval attack to go through. This isn't important, but that's what I was focusing on doing for a long time, because I like the Navy. It worked out, thus achieving, well, nothing. We can shoot the vague edge of the enemy base, which we don't need to do. The other attacks, though, do the actual business. I was being very methodical, like killing absolutely everything. We totally don't need to do that. The goal was just to kill their commander, who was up there, almost off screen, probably got hit by long-range artillery and something and died there. What we could have done is just scout out where they were and fire like 5 nukes all over the base to guarantee that we killed them, and we wouldn't have had to move out at all. After the stage, I was looking through the stats, and it tells you here your mass and energy wasted. This is the thing I keep getting at, where like if you're not spending resources, you just don't get them at all, and it's represented here. And it tells us that we were playing very inefficiently, as predicted. I could have had a much smaller economy and been just as powerful, or I could have been much more powerful. Both would require better game sense and better micro to pull off. The potential is there. These numbers are so big that it's kind of hard to look at them and judge like what the ratios are, but the answer is, if it's not like 10 or some really low number in the spent thing, you weren't playing like a hive mind perfect Supreme Commander thing, which is probably the best use of AI. I think that's what we should focus human technological development towards. We need a machine that can play Supreme Commander 2 better than me, and can recognize me shouting at it so it can put in the inputs for me. I'll be like, you take care of the economy, the goal is gunship rush. And then I sit back, and the gunship rush happens perfectly, and probably doesn't work because that's a bad strategy. Anyway, we're moving on to the next stage, where the hostile part of the Cyberans are working with the hostile part of the Aeon, so we're fighting Cyberans and Aeon this time basically. We need to go capture a prison building somewhere on the map that contains various agents of the loyalist Aeon, and they have secrets and such, and they're going to be tortured and turned into AIs or something to get their secrets. What we're doing right here is we're going to use our commander to fight off this initial wave of attacks. We first have to defend this basically dead base. Luckily, your commander is a decent unit, so while they're risky to use, they can do pretty good business, especially against tier 1 enemies, and you can upgrade the commander to make them a very good unit if you really want to put them on the front line. But since your main loss condition is usually losing the commander, having them just act as an engineer and spend most of the stage under a bunch of shields and near nuke defense is probably a better idea. So what we're supposed to do is attack this base on the other side of a cliff, and obviously we are not going to be doing that. Like, I'm very cautious at this stage in my Supreme Commander experience. After that last stage threw a couple of curveballs at me, I think I just sort of snapped and I was like, right, I now have 0 tolerance for map expanding surprises. So what I decided to do is sit back and just build up to tier 3 immediately, not attacking the enemy, slapping down this base over here as well, just ready for when the map expands in that direction. You can vaguely tell what direction the map will expand in, so I've got defenses facing relevant directions, especially to the north where I was expecting something big to come, like an air attack to come in on our main base or something like that. Looks like my obsession with putting down walls there actually stops me from setting up the air staging post I needed for that base, so that was stupid. Walls generally aren't a good idea, but I just enjoy putting them down anyway. The main thing to do is get all of the tier 3 economy buildings up, so have loads of power generators and mass fabricators, so that we just have loads of resources to use to do whatever we want. We're now well over an hour into the preparation. Like, I just spent an hour making this series of bases. There's tons of shields, tons of defenses, we've got loads of units. We're just ready to do stuff now. We've got a little bit of a navy set up for when navy will probably become relevant later, but we don't have the pop cap to really commit to that right now, and we don't need to. What we are going to do is take this gigantic land army and finally attack the enemy base, only an hour and a quarter into the stage. And it was so easy that it just sort of happened while I wasn't looking at it, probably because I have the tier 3 artillery as well. So we completely obliterate that objective. It just took us an extremely long time. And this is where it's going to pay off, because now it gives us another objective. We already have a gigantic army, a well-defended base. This is where the investment pays off, and it feels good. I enjoyed doing this, where you just sort of blindly make a base that's ready for anything, and then you see what the anything is. And indeed, that random base I put in the east does get attacked and holds off some enemy airstrikes. They've got tons of land units coming out of this long, winding chasm, but we can set up our gigantic land army in position to attack them. And then we'll attack up the chasm. Our army's too big to really do that, so we're going to take losses and it's going to be inefficient, but of course that doesn't actually matter. Like, we can just put a forward base in the enemy base if we need more units later. And our tier 3 artillery setup is already there to start blasting at the enemy's production on the other side of all these cliffs. The prison we need to capture is out there somewhere, but generally in Supreme Commander, if the mission objective is to capture something, it doesn't matter if you hit it with collateral damage. The thing you need to capture is usually invincible or always invincible. You might have seen that at the end of my previous video when it's like, go and capture the Black Sun control device, and I was completely obliterating it, nuking it, hitting it with everything just to kill off its defenses, but the thing you need to capture doesn't die. So, what I'm saying is, we don't need to have any tact. There's no situation where the game could be like, oh, don't just nuke the enemy base. It's gonna let you nuke the enemy base. It always lets you have all of the options, basically. So it's both unstrategic in that way, but it's very rewarding and fun as well. So, I can complain both ways once again, but I think it's probably better the way it is. Looks like having a navy will pay off as well, because the secondary goal is to capture an island, and we have units that can basically destroy that entire island without ever getting close to it. We are in business. There was something special you can do that it's trying to tell me about here, but, well, I'm not listening, I guess. You can use the fact that we have agents infiltrating the Order to blow up some of their buildings or something. But we could also send in loads of gunships to blow up their buildings, and well, that's doing just fine. And we don't need that either, because we have that gigantic land army gradually working its way up the passes. Soon there's enough space for us to actually form up, and we see a rare instance of an effective looking formation. Because the Aeon have this unique shield generator unit that can be among their armies, they automatically will move to the front of an army. So you have this wall of shields that gives you some actual protection as you move on in. The issue is that because I use attack move, and they don't have any weapons, they will just quickly move to where you said to attack move to, while the rest of the army hangs back doing the attacking, meaning it's hard to keep any sort of useful formation with them together. So maybe in practice they're not that good, but I liked the idea. Something cool happened there, aesthetically at the very least, for a very brief time. Now once we captured this area, I didn't go and take the building for the objective, because of course we want to wait a second and just establish here, ready for whatever's gonna happen. I started making a fire base here, thinking if there's stuff like towards the top right of the map, I'll need some other tier 3 artillery positions to fire at them that aren't in my main base, or at least I might do. I figured it would be to my advantage to send the land army up this passage as I captured the thing, thinking surely the enemy base will be up here. But as it turns out, there is a big wave of stuff that comes down this passage, and that wave of stuff is quite powerful. They have loads of experimental weapons. That means my leading experimentals, of which I did have a couple, get overpowered and killed, leaving the land army very vulnerable. Obviously we're really choke pointed here, so we can't fight together. That emergency ball of gunships once again comes in useful. And I'm thinking, right, it's time to nuke my own forces. That's our only hope here. I need to guess, where shall I drop the nuke so that the enemy have walked to that point by the time it hits? Pretty sure I had no instinct for what the correct answer was there at all, and this shot that I fired completely missed. I didn't actually see it land, but it probably missed. Well, our land army will be damaging the enemy, but getting destroyed along the way. I'm going to quickly pop back to base and order a bunch more gunships. I don't have enough engineers to really spit them out quickly. You can put 50 engineers working on a factory to really quickly spit out units. Right now, that's going to be more for later. For now, we're going to be saved by something else. While we do lose our entire army, and the enemy are about to attack our artillery base, which will be easy for them to take, I think my commander's there as well, which is a bit of a risk. The conversation happening in the top left saves us, because the Aeon Order, the Aeon Rebels, learned that the princess is still alive, and they're like, well, okay, we'll just rejoin your faction then. And that causes all of the green units to become part of an allied faction that is now going to be towards the top right of the map. And obviously this invites the idea that if I had actually just run away from the enemy as they came on in, things would have gone much better for us. I could have saved my land army by being far enough away that the cutscene had finished playing out by the time we engaged. So we engaged at the time when the Aeon were turning to our side. We'd easily defeat the Cybran element of the attack force, and then we would be in a really strong position. Instead, we've kind of lost everything on the right-hand side of the map. But it ceased to matter just in time, so that was that. Now we've got this allied faction up there which is getting nuked. They're nuking each other, and I mentioned in the first video, I think, that there is this nuke system in the game, and I don't think the AI ever uses it against you, or at least I've never seen it get to that point, and I kept trying to build nuke defenses everywhere in case they did. So that was a rare case where nukes were used, but only as part of a scripted event, I guess. I'm using nukes here, you can see, but this nuke is going to be destroyed. This is how we can tell whether the enemy has anti-nuke missiles loaded in the anti-nuke missile launcher, because even if they have the launcher that stops nukes, it has to build anti-nuke things in it before it can use them, and you can exhaust its ammunition by just constantly firing at it with more and more nukes. So you could do something there, or you could do what I'm going to do, that is just spam Navy and then take the coastline, because plenty of the enemy base was near the coast. After that, we were just sort of marauding around until we got this opportunity. I've got gunships hovering around the enemy base, and the enemy commander walked out of the enemy's shielded area for a while. It tries to walk back, but it's not going to be fast enough. We quickly swoop in and take it out, and that completes the stage. I was probably just sitting there, firing artillery at the enemy base the whole time, because I couldn't be bothered to remake my land army after losing it. But it paid off in the end. We got the opportunity. We blew up the stuff, and then the cutscene carries on here to reveal what this stage was actually about. I guess I wasn't paying attention. What we're trying to do is capture a Seraphim commander. There was one en route to this base, so by capturing it we've now got the chance to take them alive as they come out of the teleporter gate. What I'm not sure about is where this fits into the plot, or whether it's even mentioned again. We've taken one of them. Maybe it's something to do with decoding their language or something. I feel like maybe that comes up again. Well, we capture one of the guys. I don't know if that's ever actually used against them in some way, because the next mission isn't necessarily related. We move on to a stage where, because the princess is back for one reason or another, lots of the Aeon who had gone over to the Seraphim side are now coming back over to our side. So we've got another Aeon civil war going on. But the princess herself is located in a physical location now. I thought she was a god or something, but maybe not anymore. She's in a building on a planet, and that place is under attack by what remains of the rebelling Aeon. So we're going to come in here and try to sort things out. We need to evacuate the princess and just kill all of the Aeon. I think they're also working with the Seraphim to build some super weapons or something on this planet. I think it is mentioned at some point. There are all kinds of stakes. There are all kinds of reasons why the icons have to shoot dots at each other, and we're not really going to worry too much about what they are. It's finally my time to shine. This is a really Navy-focused stage, and from the picture at the beginning where it shows you vaguely what the map's going to look like, I had seen that the entire map is covered in sea. And by this point I'd also worked out that that picture is what the map's going to look like, so you don't have to guess quite so much. So, we're going to make a navy. The problem was, as I was starting to set up, I had my commander up at the top of this island we're on, and the enemy made an air attack. I was probably up there to start a base up there to prevent this very thing from happening. However, their gunships are doing a number on me. What I could actually do here is take the commander and throw them into the sea. Because you can walk on the seabed, the gunships won't be able to attack me. However, I don't do that. I try to just walk back towards my anti-air defences and get some fighters over. That doesn't work out, and we just about die. In fact, we just die before I would have accidentally discovered that I could go and hide in the sea there. So there we go, we actually failed a mission for once. Things are starting to look up in terms of the game providing some kind of pushback to me hardly paying any attention. So a guy sits there saying, well, we're all going to die, but luckily we can go back in time and try again. This time I was faster to establish an anti-air base at the very top of this island, because we're already, of course, learning the pattern that the enemy is just going to attack the point of this island, so we might as well focus all of our military stuff right there. Although again, we're under pressure. They send in big enough attacks from the very beginning that there is actually a chance that they could take down a position as you're establishing it. And generally speaking, the game isn't that aggressive against you, so something different is happening.
My reaction to this place getting heavily attacked is to put even more anti-air stuff here, because of course we know they're only going to attack specifically here, so we'll have the entire island basically undefended and then just have 10 anti-air towers in the corner, because the enemy will only ever think to attack that corner, so they've still got that weakness going for them, and that advantage is going for us. So once we've set up something vaguely stable, I can set back and do what I really wanted to do, make a bigger economy, and start making an absolutely massive navy. So that's the plan. However, the enemy come at me with this surprise attack. They've got a tier 3 battleship that comes in and starts obliterating my base here. They easily bring down the shields and start blowing everything up, so we're in trouble. I didn't have an easy answer to this, because my navy right now is a bunch of tier 1 submarines. The upside is that the battleship can't target submarines, so I can very slowly kill it without taking any return fire, but the battleship is absolutely obliterating everything on the land, and I just can't stop them. So we'll just have to hit it with literally like 200 torpedoes, and it will go down. It's just got so much health that our tier 1 attacking units don't do very much. It made me think that if they had 2 battleships, we'd probably lose right here. We just wouldn't be able to kill them before they blew up our whole base. One thing I could, again, do is put our commander under the water so that we're safe from the battleship attack ultimately. Well, what they choose to do is go and take out our naval yards, which is fair enough, but that doesn't matter too much. I was more concerned about them taking out the anti-air towers and then also making an air attack at the same time, then I'd be even more screwed. Luckily, they're not doing anything so concerted as that. So they take out a bunch of our naval production, die, and then I'm going to immediately just be like, right, 10 submarines wasn't enough to stop them. What if I had 20 submarines? So I'm just going to make even more tier 1 submarines because they're quick and easy to make. And indeed, this attack does come in again. Our position is a bit stronger, and you can see I've put down some point defense lasers, so we've got some stuff shooting out from the land at the ship. But again, that's only tier 2, our shields go down instantly and we start losing things very quickly. We've got more submarines than before, so broadly speaking this will be less bad, but it's still going to be a setback. But as long as we're still making progress overall, I suppose it's fine. The question is, would the AI ever send in a second battleship or increase the size of their battle group? And I'm pretty sure that in this stage I did notice that things weren't exactly the same with every attack. Even this attack that's happening right now had a couple of support ships with the battleship. But I think there might be something scripted there, so maybe they're doing the thing that I would have hoped they would have done, where it's not doing anything clever, the scripting is just slightly more complex than do the same thing over and over again, so it looks a tiny bit clever. I think after the second battleship raid, there wasn't another one, which makes me think that this isn't a scripted repeated attack. They just had a couple of them, and at a certain timestamp it will send them forward to do something. The main attack they kept making is this one here, coming from the vague northwest, and that's just generic tier 1 trash. It actually did pretty well at taking out our allies' base on the other island, as you can see, but we can easily defeat them with this block of submarines that they can't do much about. Since our allies were kind of defeated over there, I'm just going to move in. That's free real estate. I don't trust them to defend the northern half of their island. I might as well do it, even freeing up a bit more space for me to make some more economy buildings for myself. So we're starting to get this place locked down, and if you check the timestamp in the top right, we're once again over an hour into the stage, and we've just about finished making our base. So I'm really playing things slow, although the game speed is turned up, so it doesn't actually take an hour to do this, but at normal game speed we're playing things slow, so gives you an idea of how slowly you can play things in this game, and that there is an advantage to doing so indeed. You really don't need to play very aggressively or high APM, which is unusual. Almost all strategy games benefit immensely from you being really aggressive, or indeed can only be played if you play very aggressively. For me, I'm sitting back, I'm making more commanders, something I hadn't really done before. You can make additional commanders which just function as really powerful engineer units, and we can make this thing over here. We saw in my first video the Aeon have the Tsar, a giant UFO thing that floats around. They also have a sea version of it. You can make a giant sea UFO. It's just a big circle, and it's going to be incredibly useful for us on this naval map. And why make just one? A short time later, and by short I mean long, we have all of these gigantic circles floating in the sea. They function like tier 3 artillery, so they're just very long range artillery,
set on a giant floating platform, but I believe you can also submerge them so they're immune to air attacks, and I think they might shoot torpedoes as well at enemy submersed units. They're pretty useful. And one thing about these experimental units that I didn't realise until literally this stage is that they only add 1 to your pop cap. So like right now, I have like 80 free pop cap. I could make 80 of those things, and of course because you have infinite resources, there's no real reason you can't do that, it's just that it would take a long time. Well, I spent enough time. Here we are at 1 hour and 42 minutes, finally moving out, noting there that it took 8 minutes to get our army to move from our base to outside of our base. The pathfinding of large groups of units is abysmal. If you were looking really closely, you would have seen I gave an order to move forward, and like half the units moved backwards. Because they start trying to like get into a formation and work around each other's paths. And of course having these gigantic discs in our fleet ruins things for the pathfinding as well, because they get stuck on the land, they get stuck on torpedo launchers and just stuff that's in the water. And generally speaking, this navy is much less strong than it looks, because most of it can't be deployed into combat at any given time. You do need to take such jankiness into account and think like, okay, it might be better to make somewhat of an air force and only half the navy, because they can occupy the same space on the screen and there'll be less pathfinding problems. Something that will come up actually in my next commentary I'm going to make, which will be on StarCraft, which does have that feature quite heavily in it. Anyway, after a very long time, coming up on 2 hours, I sent my gigantic navy forwards to attack the enemy base. And because we have all of these experimental battleships, we don't really have to do anything here. As I said, they're kind of like tier 3 artillery, but with lesser range. They'll just get near the enemy base, blow all of it up, you don't need it to be in vision range or anything like that. And I've got this huge screen of submarines just keeping anything that might come close to them at bay, and a bunch of other ships that I guess are there too, but aren't helping quite so much. There's one other thing that shot by earlier, which was that I was making the unique building of the Aeon, the Paragon Resource Generator. At the experimental tier, the Aeon have a building that is much more powerful than I thought it was. I made it in this stage, but I didn't use it or notice what it was for really. Well, we'll come back to that. I'm just going to put that in as a foreshadowing comment. What happens now is we take out the enemy base. It's revealed the Seraphim are building some super weapons over at one of their other bases. So this implies there is actually a time limit to this next part of the stage, because you have to stop them building these gigantic super bombers. Maybe if they do build them, you still have the chance to kill them and it would be fine. But it feels like there's some pressure now, another rare thing for a Supreme Commander stage. So all I need to do is, well, send my gigantic pre-existing navy to go to the right. And here's where spending 2 hours preparing for this pays off, because it doesn't matter what the enemy base has. I've got so much stuff, I can just move towards it and things will be fine. Like even if they have anti-ship things, like fleets of torpedo bombers and torpedo launchers or something, it doesn't matter because I have all of the number on my side. And quite a lot of units in the game also regenerate health. I think that's conditional. I never really worked this out, but basically in the background your units level up. Like it records how many kills everything has, and I believe a unit can be between level 1 and level 5, and they get various perks at the various levels. I'm not sure if the game ever tells you what they are. I remember reading about them somewhere. And sometimes some units unlock regenerating health based on what level they are. So as your death ball gets kills, it becomes even more powerful. That's basically what I'm saying. So this is real big trouble for the enemy. What I should really do here is split this death ball into 2 or maybe even 3 death balls. We could more efficiently kill different parts of the map at the same time and not be facing so many pathfinding issues. However, I really like selecting an army that can just completely dominate anything in the entire game and just saying attack, move towards the enemy base. Like, that's my style, I guess. There's something satisfying about giving a single order about which the enemy cannot do anything. A completely micro-free, ultra-powerful, single-click attack, move over there. You can basically be guaranteed that your big blob is doing good work. And you, as you can see here, can spend time doing something else. The enemy are making pretty hefty attacks from the east against my main base. I had actually set up some defenses facing that direction thinking this might happen, but not enough, so I am having to scramble a little bit to stop them from invading us pretty heavily over here.
But luckily, I've got plenty of free micro time because the main attack to stop this big super bomber thing is just playing itself. It's playing it pretty badly. You can see most of the units are barely doing anything. They're just sort of stuck on the land and static and aren't even moving towards the objective half the time. I'm very bad at the easiest possible strategy in the game. This could be going much better than it's going already, but it's still going good enough, and I guess that is, again, the Supreme Commander comment. And I'm also making even more experimental battleships here at the back with my support commanders. As you can see, I have absolutely no mercy. I'm just like, I don't care if all of my units are stuck all over the map. I'll just cover the entire map in experimental battleships, and there'll be nothing the enemy can do anymore. There was a quite easy side objective to save a loyalist ship or something. That's what's happening at the bottom with our gigantic gunship screen to keep the enemy off the thing we're escorting. The game was very generous about letting you decide when the thing to escort would start moving in the stage, so you could be completely ready to guard it. No surprises there, very much in the spirit of Supreme Commander, in that it's just going to let you do whatever you want, including a thing that will make playing the game trivially easy. Well, I'm doing that as well over here. We're starting to get our navy vaguely in range of the base we need to destroy, which again is sort of on a time limit, like the law implies. They're about to do something bad, we have to stop them. But there's no timer. I guess there's the organic timer in that they might start doing it after a while. I just don't know. I sort of secretly believe that if you just didn't attack the enemy base, nothing bad would happen. That seems to be the way the game's designed. You saw me there using a little psionic ability we have. The princess has loaned us some of her psychic vision, and we can use it through this tower you can build to look into the fog of war and see what's going on. Well, we don't need it because in this case the enemy base is all close to the sea, so our navy will eventually see the whole base, although you can see here I couldn't be bothered to send most of my navy over to attack the top right hand corner. So we really didn't utilize our gigantic naval advantage, and nor should we have, really. So we do that, we've stopped the enemy making a fleet of super bombers of some kind, and now we move on to what we came here to do in the first place, to save the princess. She's got this pretty funky base with this big ice wall around it, but it's heavily under attack by the aliens. They've got various defensive lines holding the enemy off, so again, we have a naturally occurring time limit of sorts, in that I think the enemy will eventually defeat the princess and you'll lose the stage if you don't do something about it. What can we do about it? Well, I was thinking it's time to use something I'd spotted earlier in the game but didn't really take advantage of. You can set up your commanders with teleporter packs so that they can jump anywhere on the map. I believe doing so prevents them from getting some other upgrade. There are like various upgrade trees. So you might focus on having a commander who gives you more resources or one that's better in combat, these sorts of things. And one of the things is you can jump anywhere on the map. Now, a sensible thing to do would be to give it to one of my other commanders, because I can make commanders now. I shouldn't send in my main commander, because if the main one dies, that's game over. We're sending in the main one, because... and that's the end of the reason. So we're out here on the front lines, and I thought, well, let's just make this front line better so that we have more time to play with. And speaking of time, you can see I chose to reduce the game speed to basically 0. You can't pause the game and still give orders like in some games. What you can do though is play the game in really slow motion, so if you have some time sensitive but complex series of orders you want to give, you can totally slow down time and just do it. In this case though, it does not help that much because the enemy are already attacking this position. We can't get our shields up and running, they're just bombarding us, and we're going to be suffering again from Aeon not being the best faction for defense. Because you don't have a tier 3 point defense tower, it means that Aeon bases tend to be weak against just a generic rush of land units, at tier 3 anyway, and that's what's hitting us right here. So it takes a long time for our towers to kill single enemy units. My solution? Make 20 towers. That's basically what we're doing here. We've got a little bit of pop cap left, so I can just put loads of buildings in our new defensive position. You can see I abandoned the one I was fighting at originally, and just sacrificed that one to buy some time to make a better one a little bit further south. I could make things easier for myself by teleporting over another commander or something, But I'm not. Again, that's about it for the strategy commentary. There are like loads of things I could do to make this easier, and I'm just not. Looks like I'm entertaining myself by blowing up this enemy base that's sort of on the way for the Navy, so we'll have fun with that. I did eventually send out an air transport with a tier 3 engineer, and I teleported over a support commander at some point to help defend this base, because it's not going that well over here. We're starting to lose our front line of turrets. There's the air transport, half dead, looks like it made it. I think I was moving it like along the seam on the edge of the map, and the enemy still shot it a little bit, but it made it. So anyway, something good's happening. We could have just teleported over like 10 commanders the second the objective came up, if I had been prepared to do that, but I wasn't. But indeed, the only like challenge that's left in the game at this stage is to face challenges not knowing what they are. So somehow sort of dodgily doing this with one commander and somehow getting a transport over there to just about shore up our defences, that felt good. I like that it's giving me all this freedom about how to go about completing this objective. I just think the fact it's not reacting to how well I'm doing against it makes it hard for me to even consider it like a gameplay challenge. It's kind of fun to do, but looking back on it, it's like, well, that was trivially easy. Like anybody could have done that, like with almost any strategy. What else is happening? We're sort of killing a Seraphim commander on the seafloor there with torpedoes. He teleports away apparently, so we don't get the kill, which is good, because if we did kill that guy, the nuclear explosion would have taken out a whole bunch of my fleet. So that all worked out pretty well, thank you to the Seraphim. Meanwhile, our defensive line is really starting to come together now. We've managed to get the fighter cover over here, and I'm even putting in some tier 3 artillery, so we're really going to have that little choke point completely sealed off. So we'll have infinite time to move the Navy towards the enemy base, which is going to be difficult again because of the pathfinding issues. Trying to move with a group where half of the group is on the other side of the map causes all kinds of issues. I remember looking up at the hotkeys somewhere, and there are all kinds of alternative move commands that I think were implemented to get around that problem. You can do things like attack at speed, attack in formation, like special attack commands like that, where I don't remember what the hotkeys were. They're not like ever shown to you in the game, so it's not like an official technique or something. There's something going on with the micro that you can do to get around a lot of the problems I did have. One problem I didn't have was completing the stage. It just sort of happened while I wasn't looking at it. Maybe an artillery shell hit the enemy commander or something. And that was that. The princess is saved. She says that she has an idea for how to defeat the Seraphim and then goes away. And we go back to some more practical business. It turns out the Seraphim are building some gigantic quantum gates that will allow them to attack anywhere in the galaxy, and I think bring through like infinite reinforcements or something. So just to continue the war, we need to quickly defeat these gates. So we come down to another random stage. We spawn in at a half-dead base, and are told to defeat the base just over the mountains to the northwest, and of course you probably know what I'm thinking by now. We are not going anywhere near that base for at least an hour. We've got some business to attend to here. There's only one problem with my grand plan to do nothing. The enemy are doing something. There were quite a few different early attacks that came on in, so this is more like it, and that one there was super cheeky. They were attacking me with engineers. They have no weapon, but engineers can capture any building. So if enemy engineers get in your base, they can start converting your buildings to the enemy side. Just have to make sure you have at least like 1 or 2 units to stop them from doing that. So that's a nice early check, and they do take one of our mass extractors. We can take it back, of course. But the regular military attacks also proved to be difficult to deal with. There weren't that many of them, and they're not sending very much. It's just that I have nothing, because I'm doing this super inefficient, super slow, hardly paying attention build, where most of the time we're out of resources and just are getting that debuff, which I'm pretty sure I still didn't know about. I found out about this like towards the extreme end of my Supreme Commander experience. We're getting screwed over right here. And when the enemy attack with like 6 bombers as they did there, we don't have the air interception fighters to stop them, and we just lose buildings every time. We are held back by 2 factors. One, that Aeon's tier 1 anti-air defenses are really bad. Like sometimes they're just equivalent to nothing. They just miss all the time and they barely do any damage. But also, I'm focusing on making units rather than making engineers. And this is sort of a beginner's mistake really. I feel like it's faster, too. If you wanted to have 10 anti-air units be constructed, you don't queue up 10, you queue up 5 engineers,
set those 5 engineers to make the next set of 5, and that gets you the first 5 faster than if you just queued 10 to begin with, if that makes any sense. So I'm not being very efficient. I could use my resources to speed up production of things. However, that does also make the economy more difficult to manage because it increases your resource throughput. So you can't necessarily always do that. Or if you want to do that, you have to make sacrifices elsewhere or pause production on something, and we're not doing anything like that. What I'm doing instead is trying to brute force my way through to a tier 2 base, which will have superior resource production and some shields to defend against enemy bombers. Meanwhile, our commander does the work of killing the enemy attack groups. We could also, once we're not fighting, use the commander to eat up some of the base ruins nearby. Since we have no mass right now, that's precisely what we need. There's stuff everywhere, and I was being very negligent about actually picking up the mass. We could be really rich if I just had like 1 or 2 engineers patrolling around the base, picking everything up. I suppose I was busy trying to stop my commander getting hit by artillery back there. Eventually though, we start eating this old base, now we have full resources all of a sudden, and we can get to business. I'm trying to force through some tier 2 power generators, and then we can start doing things like mass fabrication and picking up the rest of the base to quickly get the resources we need to make some more stuff. But it's the shields I'm more interested in. As tier 2, you can not only make static shield generators, but you can make the mobile shields generators as the Aeon as well, which will prove useful. It's surprising how long it takes to make single air interception fighters, so we keep getting bombed, and I just can't outnumber the bombers with my fighters at all. Like, it takes a long time to build up a big blob of everything-proof fighter screens, especially because we don't have the resources or the engineers to make anything particularly quickly. So we remain under siege. We eventually sort of concentrate our base in these little shield bubbles I've managed to set up, but we're still under heavy attack. I've got 1 tier 2 point defense tower that will very slowly defeat enemy attack groups, but as long as the shield holds, it doesn't matter how long it takes really, because they're not going to do any permanent damage as they sit there firing at us, so that's all good. One of the reasons I was struggling was I was trying to build an artillery position in the northern base, and one thing that you need to keep in mind is that while each building has a resource cost, it also has a resource throughput cost. So like, some buildings might have a high cost, but when you build them, the cost is paid for very slowly, so it doesn't feel like it's very expensive to make it. With artillery, it doesn't cost that much, but you have to build it quite quickly, so to speak, so a lot of your resources go into doing just that while you're building artillery, I guess because artillery is so powerful. And that means I was further losing control of my economic throughput. We don't have enough mass anymore, and we've eaten half the ruins nearby. I could just go out and eat all of the wrecks of enemy vehicles, although of course the constant waves of enemies coming in make that very difficult to do. You can see what I'm doing here though. I've got the mobile shield generators out there to protect the engineers while they establish better forward base positions, and this is very nice. I think this is something you can only do as the Aeon, which is quite nice. Although I believe also that the Aeon shield generators, or the static shield generators, give you less shield than the other factions, or at the very least a smaller shield that covers fewer buildings. I don't remember because I haven't actually played as the other factions any time recently. There's something going on, like while the factions are equivalent, there's some kind of balancing differences between them, just not that major. Anyway, soon I've got what I need. We've got enough tier 2 point defense towers to defend the lines we've established, and we'll just make them more and more powerful to settle in and get to the point when we have that infinite time as wanted. We still need more fighters, we still need more air cover, but over the next while, the next 20 minutes or so in game, we get to this point where we now have a tier 3 economy and our base is shielded enough that it's not going to take any more damage and we can start base creeping across the map. Meanwhile, I've got this land army which I can use to shield the production of this forward mass extractor. This is a hard spot to hold because the enemy scripted attack route goes all the way around this little cliff area. So they're always going to spot your mass extractor here and take it out, unless you build a forward base on top of it, which is what we're going to do. We're also using sniper bots. I don't know if the other factions get sniper bots, but they're a unit which has extremely long range and extremely low rate of fire. But we can just plant them on top of these cliffs, and because we can see the enemy through our radar, it will just snipe the enemy in their base and cause big damage over time. And of course eventually we actually bother to kill the enemy base, but that's only after we've got the full tier 3 economy and some base artillery set up as well. Plus you can see I've got this massive gunship and air interceptor air force just sitting around in case I need it for whatever happens next. So we've made some of the preparations that I think the game is expecting you to make. We've got up to PopCap. It only took an hour and 40 minutes or so. Hopefully I was using the speed up to make that go a bit faster in real life. Now they're talking here about the fact that taking out that base is all we really need to do here, and we're supposed to just retreat, but we can't retreat because the Seraphim have set up some anti-teleportation towers of some kind or something. Long story short, we need to take out this other base that is a bit further to the west. And of course, now we're going to reap the rewards of being quite prepared. We already have the land army that will be sufficient to take out the enemy base, and we also established this little forward base you can see on the right, which is vaguely where the enemy's old base was. It's taking a pounding, but it's just about holding out. We're starting to suffer now because the enemy have tier 3 units, and our tier 2 defenses take ages to kill them. I was getting around it there by having a support commander buff the shield. You can have commanders and engineers put their resource generation into shield towers to make the shield regenerate harder, and that will allow it to hold out for longer, perhaps long enough for your terrible Aeon defenses to defeat tier 3 attacks. Taking out the Seraphim base proved to be easy. I stopped midway through and let the artillery do the rest to buy me some more time to do stuff in our base. Once it was all blown up, it turns out that this other Cybran commander on our side, who was sort of fighting off-map somewhere, is overwhelmed by the enemy. I think I've forgotten what exactly is going on here. We were supposed to be doing something, but it's going very badly. I think the enemy have some kind of tech that's really screwing us over. We can't just teleport around like we usually do in the Supreme Commander universe. So rip to that character. I think if you played the original Supreme Commander as the Cybran, you would probably know who that character was. What we have to do now is a timed defense, although I didn't really notice that's what was going on at the time. The map expands in every direction, and there are enemy bases in every direction. I was just like, oh god, it's like, this is really cheeky of the game to throw this at me. I wasn't really ready for this. I don't think you're necessarily supposed to be ready for it. All you need to do now is not die for a set amount of time, because you are going to be gradually teleported away and we don't actually need to conquer this area or something. I thought we did. I don't even know what's going on, but what I did is take my land army and push it to the northwest to immediately attack the nearest enemy base, because I was still thinking more in the offensive mode. The problem with that plan is it means we don't have a land army in our base, and our base is getting attacked from all sides. And you can see already they've just taken units and driven them through our shield bubbles, and they can shoot at the shields from the inside. I'm using the ever-faithful massive gunship cloud to try and do something about this. Our nice rapid reaction force, which again suffers from only being tier 2. We don't have a tier 3 version of this plan, so when fighting the enemy's tier 3 attacking forces, it takes a long time to kill anything. Although in many cases we at least aren't taking return damage because they weren't bringing anti-air units. As for my land army, I was surprised to find this base in the corner is quite heavily defended, and they all are, because essentially this map was set up so that you're not supposed to attack all of the other enemy bases. We're going to have to fight some experimentals up there and have a difficult time. You can also see I've slowed time down quite a lot, and that's probably because I was panicking. It's like, what do I do now? It's not like I'm using this time very effectively. I'm barely giving any orders. I'm just kind of looking at things and being like, what options do we have right now? And once the option of throw the gunships in goes away, because the enemy were attacking with fighters and the odd anti-air unit, so they eventually get ground down, we end up in a difficult situation because I just can't react to these attacks coming in, and they're coming in from multiple directions. They've got mobile artillery firing in on our base, and once a shield goes down, it's just going to start blowing everything up. With the added bonus that many buildings, such as power generators, explode when they die and do area of effect damage to other buildings nearby. So having a base that's tightly clustered around shield towers does become a problem after the shields go down, because you were trying to be space efficient, but after that it just means it's efficient for the enemy to damage you with long-range artillery and with internal base explosions from buildings. Something. This situation is extremely slowly going badly. I did defeat that base up in the northwest, and my land army is now coming back, so that's going to slightly turn the tables. And we're just benefiting, I guess, from the fact I had so many shield generators. It's taking the enemy some time to get in and really damage our base, so we are able to get our land army back, and I sent that group to deal with the south, where the enemy are attacking from multiple directions at once. We have a couple of fighters still alive that might do something against the enemy's gunship spam, but I also, from the very beginning of the stage, put anti-air defenses everywhere because I wasn't sure where the enemy were going to attack from. So we do have lots of anti-air in the middle of the base amongst our economy. As for the north, I've got a support commander really helping me out here, and my main commander as well. We built this wall of tier 2 point defense, so yes, we don't have a tier 3 way to defend our base, but we can have a lot of the tier 2 way of defending, and that's going to do something as well. Looks like the shield goes down, so that's bad news, but only just there. I'm also putting up another shield right next to it. So we're just going to go for the quantity solution. I'm going to have loads of not very good guns, and I'm going to have loads of overlapping shields, so that as one goes down, most of the base is probably still covered by the next one. It takes a while for each tower to regenerate its ability to put up a shield, and maybe they will all complement each other and that will work out. So that's the plan. There is a big weakness to this plan that I was completely not paying attention to, and that is that by effectively sacrificing my main southern base to start making a new highly defended one around my commanders, we're going to suffer economic damage. Or are we? If you check the resources in the top left, we're doing really well for resources. I could be building way more, and that is indeed the case. I'm not using my economy to its full potential. This is because, as we basically lose the entire main base right here, as you can see, in the base I still have the Paragon Resource Generator building, which I made in this stage. I didn't know what it did, and after I made it, well, here's the deal. It says it's an experimental resource generator. I made it, moused over it. It said it was making like 20 mass. In fact, it said it there in the bottom left-hand corner. And I was like, what? You have to put all this time and effort into making this gigantic resource generating building, and it gives you 20 mass, same as a regular mass fabricator. I was like, well, that's not interesting. What it actually does, I much later realized, is it just makes everything free. So you have to ignore the fact, like, it doesn't say it's generating resources. If you just up your production loads and start spending all of your resources, the Paragon generator gives you those extra resources on top. So in other words, it generates more resources the more resources you need. It's infinite resources cheats in the form of a building. I completely didn't realize that and didn't use it to its full potential. However, as you can see, we didn't actually die. We survived the stage just about, despite this footage of everything blowing up, because of that building. Like, I lost all of my economy, but managed to stay in the game and constantly build more towers and more shield generators to protect my commander, because that Paragon in the corner was secretly granting me infinite resources, and I totally didn't notice. I mean, I should have noticed, because building things with commanders is usually super expensive, and somehow it wasn't costing me anything. I literally wasn't thinking about that. So a massive mechanical advantage I had completely passed me by. It caused me to win practically by accident. Once again, the most Supreme Commander is back at it again, winning the battles one way or another. I'm cheating and I don't even realize it. Well, anyway, time for the next stage, where once again the Seraphim are making a gigantic thing. This is similar to what they were making last time, I think, but it's a bit more important. They're making a giant quantum gate that will allow them to... and we have to stop them, similar to the previous stage. We also have to destroy the Quantum AI, which, again, if you played the Cybran campaign in the initial game, I think you would know what this is. I don't really know what it is. Like, the Cybrans have this hive mind AI that they sometimes use, but I think it's gone rogue. Like, the hive mind thinks the aliens will win, so it just sides with them. I don't know what's going on. It's an excuse, of course, to be fighting the Cybrans. That's the meta reason why something like that's going on. It doesn't have any gameplay impact. So let's talk gameplay. Well, this mission opens in the exact same way as the previous one, with an engineer rush, and once again, they managed to get me. I just about had one terrible unit that can stop the engineers before they capture my entire base, but they did take 2 mass extractors right in the middle of my base. Very embarrassing. And yes, things carry on exactly the same as in the previous mission, where I focused a lot on trying to get my base up and running, but we're being attacked pretty decently early on, and because I'm not really putting resources into making units, it's a little bit hard for us to defend against this. I'm kind of trying to do the bare minimum, so I can maximize the amount of resources going into more permanent things like buildings and anti-air stuff, and getting up to tier 2 as soon as possible. Once we're at tier 2, we'll be fine, because we can slap down a shield generator And then the constant air attacks are easier to deal with because an anti-air position inside the shield generator's bubble will be functionally invincible unless they attack really hard, and they didn't. And you can see here, we have these 2 points defended by bubbles, and the enemy keep attacking those 2 points, whereas they have this really vulnerable resource generation area that the enemy could easily swoop in and destroy, and they're just not, which is the weakness of scripted AI. Although that said, they actually did attack that position later on, because another scripted attack that started happening was an amphibious move from the south. Some units kept spawning in and attacking from the water. We're starting to get towards what I'm talking about here, where the AI has 3 or 4 things it can do. It's just that it's still doing those things over and over again. I want it to like fully commit to one of those avenues, but change which one it commits to for each attack, or don't change it to really take you by surprise. Something like that. Obviously that would be a harder game, but I think it would be more interesting as well. They probably wouldn't want to make it like that. Maybe that could be a difficulty mode, although of course that would cost money to set up, so that's why they wouldn't want to do that basically. Well, things work out for us, that's the point. And they're going to get better and better, because we're not going to do that objective. No siree. We've got loads of space over here because the enemy are de facto choke pointed at various places. They just won't go to a lot of the area that we sort of control on this side of the map. So we're free to make gigantic economy areas, although I'm also covering everything in shield bubbles just in case, of course, and slapping down random anti-air towers because you never know what's going to happen. So we do that, the enemy keep attacking. I've got patrolling engineers just picking up all of the wreckage from the crashing planes, which is quite handy. Looks like I'm getting to work on some base artillery there. Broadly speaking, we're going to make a better base than we've ever seen before. And I had this quite important breakthrough during this stage, or 2 important breakthroughs actually. One was concerning this Paragon resource generator thing. You can see me here setting up loads of resource generation buildings. Most of my base is just power generators and mass fabricators to make our resources. I am also making the Paragon, but I still hadn't worked out what it did, so I didn't know that making all of these other resource production areas wouldn't be that useful if we're going to go for the Paragon. Well, I guess it helps you build the Paragon, so that's something. Well, we'll get to that. The other breakthrough is right here. In fact, this happened after the Paragon breakthrough, so now we've got the Paragon, and at some point I realized, wait a minute, my resources never go negative and the bars never go down once I have the Paragon. So I worked out that there was that disconnect between what it says it does and what it does. Or what the tooltip says it does for its resources. It does actually say somewhere, this gives you infinite resources. It just kind of looks like it doesn't at first glance. Anyway, the other breakthrough is what you can probably tell I've been doing. I found a way to get a nice tier 3 point defense tower. Just build the Galactic Colossi experimental unit and have it stand in your base. So yes, we don't have tier 3 point defense, but we do have tier 4 point defense, in that once you get the infinite resource building up, you can just do anything. So you can just replace all the buildings in your base with the most powerful units in the game. And there's no economic disadvantage. You can build them at any speed, and the game will just let you afford it. So you can commit a whole bunch of support commanders who can really quickly make experimental units. And you saw I was just making them in big lines. We've also got tons of base artillery, and it looks like I'm going to finally send a spy plane to actually look at the enemy base. We were just firing at the radar contacts, of course, and that's absolutely fine, but if I really wanted to target something useful like an enemy commander, being able to vaguely see what's going on could be helpful. Well, there you go, now we know what we're killing. I didn't really do any micro though, I just kept the camera in our base for the most part and fiddled around with things. You can see here firing, we've got a different kind of base artillery unlocked, the rapid fire version. I think it's supposed to be better. It costs more to make the rapid fire version, but the shots do less damage. I feel like they're supposed to be used against concentrations of enemy units more so than buildings, but they're fine to fire at buildings as well. So there are big guns all over our side of the map doing stuff, and they're defended by lines of Galactic Colossi. So we're in a pretty good situation. The enemy base got eventually destroyed off camera, and it was time to see, how do my preparations pay off? What's going to happen next? The map expands, and it actually expanded in the way I least expected it. I had set up defenses for my base, mainly facing north and east. I think I was most facing the east. To the south, I had only a mere like 5 colossi and a few anti-air towers, and a navy stuck in the corner as well. And that's where the enemy primarily attacked from. So we actually do get pushed back very slightly by just a sudden rush of units from this direction. But we have experimental battleships and tons of anti-air ships nearby. So even though we don't have the most presence here, we can do the stuff. And of course, having 5 galactic colossi is already a pretty big deal. In the game, it's like, if you're attacked by 1 experimental, it makes a big deal about it. Like, oh no, we're going to die, they've got 1 experimental. So it's kind of surprising to realize that you can just build 30 experimentals. And as the Aeon, because you can put down the infinite resources cheat building, there's no downside to doing that. In fact, it's preferable because they use the same pop cap as regular units, but they just have way more health and probably won't die. They also have regenerating health, I believe, as well. So, here's what we do. I finally just pour out all of the stuff that's defending my base, creating an army with 20-something colossi leading the way and a whole bunch of tier 3 stuff, which, as I said, would be better replaced by more colossi, but I'm not going to do that right now. This blob will start moving towards the enemy base. And we don't even need to move towards the enemy base because you can see all the dots flying across the map. Artillery shells are landing everywhere constantly in the enemy base. They're probably having a really bad time. We also have to defend a UEF commander who's trying to set up over here and kept getting air attacked. I'm going to do the same thing I did to defend the princess a ways back. We're going to teleport the commander over there and start setting something up. So we go through the defensive protocol, get a shield down, get some anti-air towers down that'll defend against air raids. For defense against ground attacks, well, we'll throw down a Colossus. The Colossus is the tier 3 point defense of the Aeon. At least it is after you have the Paragon and everything just becomes something of a joke in terms of the economy. It'll be pretty fast to build all that because a fully upgraded commander is a very effective engineer. They build things very quickly. I could just send more stuff over there, but I just didn't. Again, like, we don't need to. Like, we could be even more powerful than this, and we're already so powerful, it's sort of ludicrous. One thing the enemy do have going for them is they have a bunch of experimental gunships. So, as the Cybran, one of their tier 4 quote-unquote units is this gunship unit, and that's sort of effective against our composition. My experimentals, the Colossi, can't target it. So if I just had loads of those, a counter spam of experimental gunships would be a good idea, or any sort of air play. But what we do have are interceptor fighters around the place, and that's really it. Like, in terms of combined arms tactics, you make an army that's going to be good against most stuff. You probably need to screen it with fighters because a massive air attack will be good against any ground army that probably isn't mostly anti-air units. And once you have that combination, it's like, well, what are they going to do against me? They can still nuke you, but they probably won't. Essentially, with a little bit of micro and a little bit of combined arms stuff, you can have an army that doesn't have any counterplay. There is no counterplay the AI could make against it if the AI was even bothering to play the game. Something, something, something. All I need to do is select these units and attack move forwards, but sometimes also send the interceptors to attack the gunships, if I can really be bothered. I'm sort of complaining about all this, but I also wanted to add, this is really cool. I love doing this, so I'm probably giving the wrong impression. I'm being like, it's so stupid, it's so easy. It's ultra fun as well. I really liked making 20 Colossi and sending them in, and doing things like bringing in air cover to do stuff and reacting to the enemy a little bit. It's just sort of somehow a really epic and detailed yet casual strategy game experience. It just sort of all came together for me. I enjoyed just how overpowered I became at this stage in the campaign. I was having fun with it. We've essentially found the strategy that I could have been using a couple of stages back. I can't remember when you unlock the Paragon Infinite Resources thing. I think in Forged Alliance you might have it in every stage, so you could have been doing it the whole time. Well, we have here the power of not just the 1 hour of preparation strat, this was the 2 hours of preparation strat if I recall. It took me 2 hours to get my army together, but here at 2 hours and 20 minutes, we completely dominate everything and we don't need to do much anymore. So sort of the gameplay of the stage was just making an army that will do whatever the stage throws at us, and then actually doing that part, like microing the army and trying to play the stage like an RTS, well, that doesn't matter so much anymore because we've got yellow dots just doing the business all over the place. Looks like it's time to bring in one of our UFOs to defend the UAF up there. I think I've already got like 8 Colossi standing around in the UEF base. We've got this map locked down, and the only question is going to be, what can they throw at us next?
As usual, I accidentally destroyed the enemy base off camera before I even got there, so that did the business. Let's see what they're going to throw at us. Well, they've got another big base to the north. The base is nothing special, but it comes with a gigantic army, which is now going to be coming at us from two main directions, one attacking our base, one attacking the UEF base. This is where having that navy that I've had in the corner doing not very much the whole time is going to come in really useful, because now we have naval access to a large part of the enemy base, but more importantly, it's the only thing that's really in position to defend our main base, because our gigantic land army is, well, it was standing by the enemy base and I didn't even use it to attack that base, so I might as well have left it at home. As it turns out, that would have been useful right now as our main base is being attacked extremely heavily. I sent in all of my air superiority fighters to try and defend against the air attack coming in. I'm pretty sure they died instantly. I've got some gunships there which won't do very well because the enemy have air superiority now. I'm microing the artillery guns by the looks of things, hoping I can just shoot the enemy base and do something, but that's not going to help with the immediate problem. We're losing the north end of our base, and there's more and more stuff coming in. We do have a couple of colossi that were still in our base, so we've got something to use there, but actually it's not that much compared to what the enemy have. There are several experimentals in the attacking group. So yes, it's going to have to be our navy that saves us here. You can see various dots coming in from the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Those are from our missile cruisers, or missile ships I think they're called. You can build a tier 3 long-range attack ship that just sits there bombarding things at extremely long range. It's like sea artillery basically, and here it's doing the business. Both sides had a Tsar and they seemed to cancel each other out. The enemy have a Fat Boy, a UEF experimental attack unit, but our static artillery can just about shoot it. It's a close thing because the long-range tier 3 artillery can't shoot at things close to your base, so that thing was just far away enough for us to be able to target it. And we bring it down, but more and more stuff is coming in. Another spider bot is terrorizing me, just like in my previous Supreme Commander video. But you can see the missiles are just flying in constantly. It's being hit all the time. That's gradually taking it down, which is good because our gunships are probably not doing very much up here. We've got tons of those tier 2 gunships still trying to kill enemy units. It just takes so long for even like 30 gunships to kill one tier 3 attacking unit that it's not very helpful. What I really need to do is make a tier 3 army here of my own. We've got the pop space now, but I probably didn't have the engineers available to quickly make an army over there. As for the army we do have, I was attacking the enemy base, but here I'm going to do something uncharacteristically cautious. I'm going to go back. That's because I saw the enemy were deploying their experimental gunships, and I knew I barely had any air interception fighters ready. So I thought I will wait to make my main attack until I have proper air cover to fight the enemy's gunships. We could probably just walk through the gunship barrage and get into the enemy base anyway, so I was being cautious. I'm now going to split my gigantic army of colossi into 2 groups. We'll send half of them back towards the main base to stop the oncoming enemy attacks, and the rest will just sit around, I guess, and defend the UEF base while I make some fighters. I think I'm being now too careful. Simply attack moving everything we had towards the enemy base would probably allow us to destroy their base before they destroyed ours. And it's also worth noting, you don't have to keep your base alive. It's nice. I can make another base somewhere else. I can put my commander in the sea so I can't lose the stage and then still destroy the enemy base, causing me to win. So we are not exactly required to defend our base. It just looks bad, I guess, if you lose the main base you spent the whole stage making. So I'm really trying to stop them getting in. Seems like a good idea, doesn't it? I get another Tsar online, and that's going to help us out. Tsar is this UFO thing, by the way. It shoots a gigantic laser which has no trouble taking down the tier 3 enemy units, unlike the gunships, which are probably now dead at this stage, and the missiles are still flying in from off-screen, gradually killing things. It's really hard to know how much damage that sort of thing is doing, because you can't really monitor it in any way. We're probably being saved by the fact I built that navy earlier in the stage when I didn't need it. So I like to think my obsession with having an Aeon navy ready for anything is paying off, and we certainly didn't have the base ready for anything, even after earlier doing the whole, 10 colossi point defense wall. They weren't there when I actually needed them in the end. There's a bit of a naval engagement happening, but we've got some experimental battleships already that can just artillery blast anything the enemy send in, and I think they fire torpedoes as well. And on the right you can see a group of colossi finally showing up to reinforce the defenses at our base. Ultimately we did lose, I think, 1 layer of base, one layer of shielded off areas with stuff in it.
But that's not going to stop us now. The enemy's attacks are petering out, although that said, after I split my forces and sent the guys that were defending the UEF base to start moving forwards to the other side of the river, some stuff showed up to attack the UEF base. And this is important because my commander is actually here, so if we lose this base we're in bigger trouble, and this is the less defended base. Again, there's no reason to have my commander here, I just did it this way because I could just send a different commander where it doesn't matter if they die. Or not send a commander here at all, also a valid option. For some reason, I like to have my commander on the same screen as the enemy experimental weapons, even on a map that's completely clear of enemies, just to live life on the edge. It also provides the practical function of the commander being a good engineer, so I can do the stuff I'm doing here, just order up 5 more colossi to defend this area. There's actually another spider bot in the water, you can see the dot in the river there. It eventually comes on out and attacks, but by the time it had done that, I had reinforced this position to such an extent that it probably can't do anything, including adding another Tsar, which pops on over to shoot its death laser from above, combined with the other death laser from our Colossus there. That should do the business. We've got another Colossus just standing there not facing the action, not quite sure what's going on. I'm guessing I had it under repairs and, I don't know, maybe I turned it off fire at will or something. Who knows what's happening there? Doesn't matter. On the other side of the map, my navy has pushed its way up the coast. The enemy deployed another Tsar against us, but by now I'd built up a ball of fighters, so now I'm ready to do my business without worrying about the enemy's air superiority possibilities. Looks like the Tsar crashing did some damage there and half killed 2 of my experimental battleships. Pretty nasty. Didn't really pay any attention to whether crashing air units were doing damage throughout my playthrough of these games. I'm guessing they do. Here I was, well, trying to do something. There was this secondary objective to capture this island, and in particular capture a building. The reward, I think, if you do this, is it gives you 1 Colossus. Yes, only 1. Add that to my pile of 30. So I basically didn't do it. There was a time limit on this objective, a rare thing for Supreme Commander, so I arrived at the island and captured it after the enemy had already done something with it, so we didn't get a free Colossus. Did that make any difference? No, I don't think so. Once I have my fighters ready, I was willing to just go at the enemy base, and of course, that base has been in trouble for a while due to long-range bombardment, which has only been intensifying over time. Here's what we actually need to do. We've got this spider bot under the sea over here. You just have to bring it into the enemy base, and by the time it arrives, we've got that enemy base very heavily locked down with just about everything we could ever want. There we go. We've captured what is QAI's core processing thing or something. Essentially, the Cyberans have a hive mind AI they designed, a super intelligent thing. For plot convenience, it exists in a static location and can't be copied or something, so we found where it is located. Our guy, Brackman, who invented the AI, says something vaguely innuendo-like about it. Basically, he's going to kill his child, the AI, and the child AI is like, you're not my real dad. Well, luckily, Brackman knows the AI's weakness. It turns out it runs on electricity. So if we just shoot a bunch of electricity into its thing here, that's going to take it out. Feels like a super intelligent AI probably would have some kind of backup and wouldn't be reliant on like a physical location, or would have fuses or something. This probably wouldn't solve this situation. But I guess the point is, the Seraphim had captured this AI and were using it, or the AI had voluntarily joined the Seraphim, I think. Now it's dead, the Seraphim don't get that on their side, but more importantly, the AI had some sort of gate codes, as the game puts it, that allows us to teleport to Earth. Earth is where the Seraphim are ultimately coming from, because that's where the rift was created into their dimension due to the princess's shenanigans last time, and the princess is back with a plan to save it. If we can use these codes to go to Earth, we can somehow put her into the rift and she'll do something about it, okay? So another sort of hand-wavy situation. We're going to solve this, and the stakes of that, the Seraphim are building some sort of gateway here that will permanently open the rift in such a way that she won't be able to solve it after that. So it's a case where the plot implies there's a time limit, but there isn't. We've got all the time in the world. So again, we're going to chill. This is the final stage of Forged Alliance, and for this one, I decided to pull out all the stops and try to make the most ridiculous build possible. Struggling there as that crater seems to block some of my attacks, something you very rarely appreciate with your map being so zoomed out most of the time. Sometimes the terrain will actually block attacks, but anyway. The point is, we're going to sit back and chill here, and this is a stage where it's probably easier to chill than it ever has been, despite it being the final mission, because of a simple reason.
you're given a UEF support commander. This allows you to use UEF buildings, which are just better at defending than Aeon ones. So we can make, as you can see here, a much bigger shield bubble, like the UEF shield tower covers a much bigger area. Maybe it's weaker or something, I don't know. But more importantly, you can set down the tier 3 point defense towers, which you can see firing here. Very powerful static defense things. So while the enemy are sending relatively powerful attacks against us, now that we have UEF buildings to play with, we just kill them instantly. It's no more of the gradually grinding them down with tier 2 stuff we've been seeing before. So with that, we've got time. The other one piece of critical information I had is knowledge of how the Paragon resource generator works, and the intention to just get one as soon as possible to get infinite resources. It's time to see what we can really do with all the tools at our disposal. Therefore, at the early time of like half an hour into the stage, we start building the Paragon resource generator. But more importantly, I had this other grand plan. What if we didn't make any engineers? Yes, because instead of engineers, you can use commanders. So if you early on build the gateway, which allows you to build commanders by summoning them from the 100 people left alive in the world, we can just have loads of commanders doing all of the economy stuff. That would be really difficult for other factions, but if you can get infinite resources, the massive cost of doing things with commanders is overcome. And you get the advantage that commanders do everything really quickly. And they act as combat units. You can use them to do other stuff. You can also upgrade every commander to be a resource generating unit in the meantime. They generate mass and power like the resource buildings. So, having loads of them gives you the resources you need to quickly build the Paragon thing, and that then gives you infinite resources to quickly build whatever you want. That seems like a pretty nice build, and I think only the Aeon can do it. I'm going to put down loads of shields around the Paragon thing to keep it alive. It does actually explode with a nuclear explosion if it dies. That's the downside to this building, essentially. So you need to not let it die. Well, looks like there's no risk from this attack. They do attack us with an experimental, but our shields just about hold for long enough for us to kill it, which I was surprised by. We didn't have that much firing back at it, but again, it's this tier 3 UEF defense turret that's doing the business. Pretty good stuff. I'm enjoying this. It has so much range, so much power. We're just so safe behind single shield generators, even against experimentals. So once we have our infinite resources, it's time to start making loads of our own experimentals. My general plan was to use the rest of the PopCap. We've got enough PopCap space to make 300 experimental units, and then we'll see what happens. Well, I'm also going to make a fleet, as you can see here. Again, the PopCap efficiency of a fleet is very high, so even though it could be more efficient, I could make my fleet 100 experimental battleships. I'm going to throw in some normal ones as well, because they give you extra capabilities. There was an accident after a while, because I ordered some of my mass and power production to kill itself by pressing Ctrl K. The problem is, it explodes with area of effect damage when it dies. You can't, as far as I know, decommission a building to just get rid of it. So deleting your own energy infrastructure and mass infrastructure destroys part of your base, and we end up losing the quantum gateway and a bunch of shields as well. So that was clever. The idea, of course, was just to free up more pop space and more actual space, because we don't need resource generators anymore. We need land to make gigantic experimental artillery guns instead, which is what I've made there. And of course we can get over the annoyance of having lost part of our base by just building 10 experimental battleships. That makes everything feel better. So we've got lots of work to do, but because we have so many support commanders, you can just task them all onto the same build chain, and they will just whip out experimental units like it's nobody's business. Here at the back, we're getting that experimental tier 4 UEF artillery going. So before, you've seen me using lots of tier 3 artillery. With the UEF, again, perhaps the superior faction, you can make a tier 4 artillery, the experimental artillery, which is even better. So we're going to have some of those firing for the rest of the stage. And for point defense, we're throwing down some colossi all over the place. I was very cautious, I expect, about the map expanding to the right and us being attacked from the east. That would be the main thing that could take us out here, because our Paragon is on that side, and it's hard for us to defend because the map is so tight against that edge. Well, anyway, once we get these big Mavor experimental artillery guns running, I need to turn them off, so I actually don't use them at first. because I don't want to blow up the enemy base and progress the stage, I'm going to make some submarines. We can again make use of the UEF experimental units. They can make submarines that will then hang out under my experimental battleships for an even more stacked experimental pile. And of course we have our experimental flying carriers over the top as well, so we can have all 3 layers of the battlefield filled with experimentals. And on land you can make the UEF Fat Boys, which are land ships basically, battleships that travel over land. Well, that's going to be handy. We can just throw those towards the enemy base. They're going to do something similar to our Colossi in that they just kill land units. As long as you have some air support to help them out, they'll be functionally invincible. I think the Fat Boys can also build units as well. They're like a factory unit, similar to our Flying Tsars. They can build fighters. Well, it's all going very well until we accidentally complete the objective once again, because the missile ships in my fleet, an unsuspecting little ally, accidentally killed the entire enemy base while I wasn't looking. Their range and power was just more than I expected. I didn't think they would do it, so I didn't tell them to stop. Well, we're moving on. We've got like 2/3 of our army built up. And now, unfortunately, the UEF is back at it again because the commander they sent to help us try and take out the Seraphim here decides to go rogue because he doesn't like the Aeon, because we're kind of weird. He's probably jealous that we're magic and stuff. He wanted to take control of the old Black Sun device, which is still around here somewhere. That's where the Seraphim are coming from. And perhaps do something. Who knows? There's just something happening here. We have to kill the guy to our northeast. Meanwhile, we've got a bunch of Seraphim and some Aeon Order forces attacking from the southwest. But of course, this massive wave of fighters they send in has to contend with the fact I have billions of these carrier UFOs, which fire anti-air missiles, so they don't last very long. And of course our base is behind so many layers of experimental units, like 30 experimentals at this stage, that any land attack would be futile. The action is happening at sea as I deploy my gigantic navy to bombard the UEF base, which is like perched on the edge of the map here. It's going to be extremely vulnerable. And their commander happens to be standing next to tons of power generators, so that same thing that hurt me earlier hurts this guy. We take out the power generators, and the commander just gets killed at half health. So there we go. We killed the traitor, and that's the end of that. Now we can turn our attention to the enemy. Not sure if that guy really calculated whether rebelling against the guy with infinite resources and 100 experimental units was going to work out for him there. Next, we need to send our navy to deal with the Aeon on that island over there, and if you're paying really close attention, that's the island that you're set up on at the end of Supreme Commander. So we had a big Aeon base there. I guess it's still there, and now it's fighting against us. They've got a problem though. They had a Paragon resource generator, and that means that as we hit their base from afar, we get a nuclear bomb going off in the middle of it that takes out most of it. So that's them knocked out pretty easily actually. Meanwhile, on land, I've got this wall of experimentals just hanging about. That's going to stop anything going too far wrong. Time to send in about 12 more experimentals because things were getting hairy for a second there. Yes, we don't really have to do anything at this stage. Of course, I have the Mavor experimental artillery that can win the game for me from my base. So I could be even more lazy right now and probably still make some good progress. Well, after we take out the Aeon, there is this big wave of enemy bombers that comes in to attack our base. They do make some progress. They take out some of the shield ceilings and probably do some damage in the base. So this is where having put like 7 shield generators around the Paragon will pay off, because if those bombers actually broke through and hit it, it would probably die pretty fast, and then a lot of our base would die pretty fast, and with power generators exploding when they die, that would set off a chain reaction essentially, and our tightly packed base would be in trouble. Which would also spell doom for the 20 experimentals currently standing in my base acting as point defense turrets. Yes, it's true overkill right here. In fact, it's such overkill that really, the end of this stage and the end of the campaign is just an anticlimax, because I just have all this stuff all over the place. I'm trying to get it to vaguely go towards the enemy base slowly but surely. You can see they're throwing all kinds of things at us, but we don't really get to fight them, because the Mavor experimentals were targeting the thing. The objective of the stage was to destroy the gate the Seraphim were building, and because we have infinite range on the Mavors, literally infinite range, we can just fire at them like the second it becomes available. They die pretty fast, and that's the end of that. So we actually don't attack the final enemy base of the campaign. It's just over. I pressed the win button so hard that I almost regret it. It's like I walked away so powerful. It became so easy. that it's like, well, what was even the point of that? Like, I expected something more than that to happen. They needed to really hit us with something big. I'm guessing the AI does not at all react to how powerful you are. Like, they could have scripted it so that if the game senses that you've built 100 experimentals, it might build some of its own, or something like that. Well, it doesn't, and it can't do anything about a lot of the strategies you can use against it, of course. That's just what Supreme Commander's like. So what happens? Well, the princess, as mentioned earlier, had a plan to end the Seraphim invasion by, well, apparently turning into a puff of smoke, and this, in one way or another, solves everything. We're not even going to bother using the word quantum, I think. What we're going to do is just wordlessly do the puff of smoke thing, say that the rift was sealed using magic, and that's the end of that. It's one of these things where, like, in the game, magic is real, but nobody ever talks about it. Like, only a few people know how to do it. But it's something you can learn. Like, anybody could be able to do the stuff the princess is doing. She's just somebody. There's nothing special about her. We just don't care in this world. Like, magic, kind of lame. I don't care if you can turn into a ghost and, like, open portals to other dimensions. I've got robots to play with. Well, anyway, we saved the world, and I think everybody is still mind-controlled by the princess into not fighting each other to some extent. So maybe, finally, the galaxy will be at peace. However, in the post-credits scene, that AI that we probably should have checked for backups of actually is still alive, as it turns out, and it's going to do something. Because yes, there is a Supreme Commander 2, where the war starts up again. I forget. I definitely have played Supreme Commander 2. I remember not liking it as much as the first one, and I think that's the general consensus on the game. It's something like Supreme Commander, but they changed the way the game works, and I can't remember how. Makes me want to actually play it, just to go and complain about it as an extra part to my Supreme Commander video ranting experience. In my first part, I was talking about how Forged Alliance is harder than the first Supreme Commander, and provides some of the challenge that the first game doesn't. But what you've probably taken away from watching this is that this isn't true. And this is because I was playing better, basically. It is harder. However, the difficulty of the game never comes close to how easy you can make it through your own strategy. The AI will never, even slightly, play as well as you. Like, maybe some of the AIs in this stage had about as much power and armies as big as the ones I was sometimes using in the original game. But because, of course, I started realizing there actually is nothing to stop me building 10 experimental units, there's nothing that the game can do after that. So it ended up being an easy but frantic experience. I enjoyed it more, the Forged Alliance campaign, just because there was more going on. And of course because you have more options, because in the original game a lot of things were locked in a lot of the stages. So being able to do whatever you want was fun. The challenges you faced were bigger, but because you could do whatever you want, ultimately overcoming those challenges became so easy by the end that it was kind of stupid. So once again, all I can say is we need Supreme Commander to have another expansion pack where it's really hard, where like the game recognizes that you could build 10 experimentals, and it's like, hey, do you want to take this base? It's defended by 5,000 experimental units. Deal with it. And because you have infinite resources and can gradually chip away at it, you actually could deal with something like as extreme as that over time. Or you could build an artillery gun and just fire at them from outside of their range, something like that. You know how it is with the Supreme Commander. There'll be a million options. Or you could like take an air transport and go around the back and just capture the objective, that sort of thing as well. Well, anyway, the big point to make about Supreme Commander is, why am I here having to talk about Supreme Commander? Why isn't there a game of a similar caliber that exists right now? I don't know what's been happening behind the scenes in the RTS production games industry. I'm guessing it just became too unpopular or too unprofitable, and companies stopped caring so much about this sort of thing. But it really feels like it would be easier now than ever to make a new Supreme Commander, because the graphics don't need to be good. They can even be worse than this, because of course, as you can see on the screen, a lot of the time you're just fighting with squares and circles. Like, the strategy is on that level. But I think you could probably increase the scale and
essentially maintain a similar level of complexity in that there are a billion possible strategies, like more than in any strategy game, just because you have so many options and so many different ways of configuring the economy to try and do it. I think there would be something special here to make the ultimate strategy game. Like, you need a company to really commit to this and be like, right, we're going to make an esports scene. We're going to make the new chess. Like, it's time for chess 2, but it's Supreme Commander. Like, it's this level of complexity. So only the biggest brained AIs will be able to fight each other and have any hope of competing on the competitive scene, because it's so complicated to play it. But it's marvelous to behold, that sort of thing. I don't know. Somebody make a game where I can fight 1,000,000 squares against 1,000,000,000 triangles. That's what I'm looking for here, and I've only got it in Supreme Commander. Although, to be a little bit more helpful, literally the thing that I want in most strategy games is to be able to zoom out the camera. I think that's what I said at the start of my first part. Like, the revolutionary thing about Supreme Commander is just that you can zoom out. There was something close to this in the War Game series, where it's a bit like that, but just less so. You can't zoom out as far, and the battles are smaller, less intense, less strategic. We just need, like, maybe the War Game franchise to expand, make a sci-fi game, and be like, you know what, you can zoom out so that the level of detail goes down to 0 and it's just 2D representations, and in exchange, the actual size of the thing you're looking at is absolutely gigantic. I want to see the entire theatre. Something like that. Once again, it's time for an off-ED, does anybody know what I'm talking about moment. I think you probably do in this case, because it really is just a shame that Supreme Commander didn't carry on the way it began. And, well, at least we can still come back to it. This is a classic thing where people are always like, they never made a sequel to the thing I like, or like, the thing I like's sequel isn't as good, it's too different, I don't like it, they made it for somebody else, and you can complain endlessly about that. But the counterpoint is always, yes, but you still have the original thing that you liked. It's still there, so they didn't really take something away from you, as it might feel like sometimes. I do feel like that. They took away the sort of dream of 15 years ago me, that games would keep going in this direction. They went very much, I don't know, in a different direction. Now it's just like League of Legends. You control one thing. I don't know. I don't know what video games are, because like all good video game commenters, I hate most video games. Well, anyway. Somebody write in the comments how to solve my problem. If you don't know what my problem is, that's another thing you need to solve in the comments, working out what my problem is. This has been an enjoyable time for me. I really liked playing Supreme Commander. After this, I played StarCraft 2, another blast from the past, less far in the past, I think. There's an RTS that fully doesn't embrace the Supreme Commander spirit. The camera's locked to the ground, you can only have 30 units, it's that sort of thing. A much more old school RTS, because it was a sequel, sort of remake of an old school RTS from even further in the past. So, we're going to look at that, mainly because it's a classic of video gaming that I've never played, and it took me by surprise in certain ways, so we'll talk about the various things I experienced when I played through the StarCraft 2 campaign in the next commentary rant video. Thank you for watching this one. A little bit different this one was to my normal ranting, because I didn't have thousands of game design points to make this time. I wasn't outraged by playing this game, so I wasn't inspired to make a truly mad rant. I was just sort of bemused and, well, overall, entertained by the game. So it feels like I had a very positive experience here, which I think actually makes for a worse video, I don't know. I like making videos where I can just rant endlessly for 5 hours and I never, stop thinking of something to say. I don't know why this happens to me. I have a brain disease. Let's get out of here.